We have our caller on the night, Jamie from Walton County. Go ahead with your question, Jamie. All right, so our producer actually kind of gave us an overview of maybe what Jamie's question. Okay, so basically Jamie was living in a trailer that caught fire that suffered significant damage. And I believe Jamie's question, Ted, is going to be, what are his rights? What can he recover? Now, there's different schedules that, cover different things. And let's just assume this is Jamie's personal residence.
Right, so there's a couple of different aspects. And first we have to get to, as many of our residents know, with Hurricane Michael, you have property insurance on your particular dwelling or home or trailer. And that will provide coverage if it is an occurrence that happens, one of which would be a fire. Storms, hurricanes, all are considered occurrences that would trigger coverage. Typically under that's your own policy, that's a contract, and you can pursue claims for the contents, the dwelling itself to repair, replace, or if it's totaled, the value of it, for the loss of use if you have to go out. And actually it's called additional living expenses in that context, to have a place to reside in while your building is being repaired. And then there's additional coverage potentially as well for what's called law and ordinance if you have to have certain upgrades with respect to your particular dwelling.
Basically building it back to the current
codes, right, even though that may be more stringent than what you had before. And then if there's collateral structures like a little outhouse, a garage, you name it, there's potentially coverage for that. But when you have something like a fire, you also have to look at what was the root cause of the fire. Is there a third party that potentially is responsible? They have cases where the next door neighbor's house catches on fire because of something that's done wrong, and that leads to your house and it burns it down. There's potential situation where there's product defects, some sort of item malfunctions, and it catches an electrical fire. In those situations, that's a third party tort claim, just like an automobile accident or a premise liability case that we've been discussing. And in those types of cases, you can then recover for not only the contents, but your personal injuries.
And you have multiple layers of insurance that may be there. If you're dealing with a contractor who has a sub that's working under him, who has a piece of equipment that malfunctioned, and the provider of that equipment. So once again, I'm gonna say it again, Ted, please don't try to do it by yourself. There's multiple levels and layers of insurance that you have to consider. And sometimes quick money is not always the best money, and you can sign a quick release with an insurance company and forever waive a lot of rights.
Right. I mean, easily you're looking at contract law, potentially tort law, product liability, and construction law all in one case. So it can be very difficult to navigate. There's going to be, if there's a potential case like that, you're going to be looking at multiple different insurance companies, different types of insurance, and trying to coordinate all the benefits and trying to, you're just trying to get your life back together in a situation like this, and then you get thrown all this information, thrown all this paper, and you just get inundated, and it gets to where you don't even know where to start. You know?
Ted, I just got a text message from a friend of mine named Chuck. Chuck has recently moved to Bay County. Actually, he came from another state, so he's been here long enough to have a Florida policy. And his question is, Chris, can you help me understand PIP insurance better? And whether or not I have any recourse against the person who hit me, because it doesn't look like he had any insurance.
Right, and a lot of times when we get, especially with folks that come from out of state, they've heard Florida's a no-fault state, so they think they've been in an accident, there's nothing they can do about it. Well, the no-fault aspect of Florida law is what you just mentioned, is the PIP that Chuck has had to get on his policy now that he is a Florida resident. It's one of the few insurances that are mandated for automobile owners in the state of Florida. But that PIP is something that you can look to, whether the accident is your fault, somebody else's fault, you name it, and it covers anybody in your household potentially. And it's up to $10,000 of coverage that's health insurance built into your policy. It can be used to pay 80% of your medical expenses that you actually incur, or up to 60% of your lost wages.
But the trade-off to having PIP in the no-fault state is that you don't have to have mandatory BI.
Right, at least in our current iteration in Florida.
And Chuck said he's concerned about the individual not having insurance to cover any type of losses that he may sustain. So, coming from out of state, he's already in Florida, he has a Florida policy. Naturally we start looking at uninsured motorists. If that's the case.
And that's one thing that everybody in the state of Florida has to have front and center on what they're looking at anytime they get a policy, because of just what you said, Chris. The other drivers are not mandated to take coverage, to have coverage to protect you, and many don't. And one of the dangerous things we do in any given day is get out and drive a car.
Yes.
It's one of the riskiest things. And why do we buy insurance? We buy insurance for those risks that we can't assume and that we can't avoid. I'm not going to buy insurance on this pen if I lose it. I'll just go buy another pen.
That's a nice pen.
It's a nice
Ted.
pen, but we can get another one. But if I'm hurt and I have hundreds of thousands of dollars of medical expenses, that's a loss I can't afford to have happen
Right.
to me, or don't want to have happen
Right.
to me. So you can protect yourself by buying uninsured or underinsured motorist coverage, and what that does is it stacks on top of whatever coverage an at-fault driver may have, and then in that situation you're technically adversarial with your own insurance company, and you have bought coverage for whomever would cause the accident for you. And it's a great way to protect yourself.
And it's extremely inexpensive,
Right.
considering how expensive insurance has gotten now.
Absolutely.
And just think about it. My rates have increased. Your rates have increased. One of our law partners, he just put his 16-year-old son on his policy, and Lord knows that was substantial. I mean, he could have bought a car almost for what he's going to have to pay for the insurance. But if insurance is increasing, chances are individuals are going to start selecting lower limits of coverage, which when they get involved in an accident, you're going to need that uninsured motorist more and more and more, because now you're taking some of the risk away by buying the coverage.
Right.
But if you don't, now you're playing against the house, and the house always wins.
And that coverage is so important
Yes.
and so critical that the legislature requires agents to provide you with a form. And if you are not going to have it, you have to sign that you're rejecting it.
But you don't want it, right.
And if they cannot produce that form at the time of an accident, then uninsured motorist coverage is essentially force placed for your benefit in the same amount of whatever you have for your liability coverage, stacked times the number of vehicles you can have. And we have had a number of situations, Chris, where that's come to effect.
Yeah.
And that is something
Bail
that
some
you
people
would
out.
not know
Yeah.
if you were trying to handle your case on
Right.
your own, because the insurance company is not going to volunteer that they were supposed to get it.
Right.
We have to stay on them and demand, produce it to us, show it to us. And it usually takes several iterations of that before they finally throw their hands up and say, we don't have it.
Right.
I had a case
They were going to afford
recently,
coverage to you.
right, that was a really bad case. And we looked at every angle, and it looked like there was no coverage. And there was clearly none through the at-fault parties. They said there was no coverage on the policy. Lo and behold, they couldn't produce the coverage sheet. And now there's $500,000 in
Right.
coverage to a woman that really needs it.
Right.